For having me. It really is an incredibly important conversation. As Jorge said, I'm Karin Garver. I'm an early childhood policy specialist from the National Institute for Early Education Research at Rutgers University. And what I'd like to do today is walk you through some of our yearbook findings related to policies that impact the quality of state-funded preschool programs. Our State of Preschool Yearbook is an annual survey that we publish every year. We survey the state administrators of state preschool programs from every state that has a state-funded preschool program. Right now, 44 states, Washington, D.C., and Guam all have a state-funded preschool program. 6 of our states currently do not have a state-funded preschool program. And what's interesting is that we actually, a number of our states actually have more than one state-funded preschool program. So there are actually about 63 state-funded preschool programs across the nation. And we ask the program administrators to fill out a several hundred question-long survey for us every year, telling us all about the policies they have in place to ensure quality of their preschool programs. So what you see right now is the laundry list of things that we ask our program administrators to talk to us about every year. But one of the things I'd like to focus on first and foremost is our benchmarks for minimum quality standards. And these are 10 benchmarks that NIEER has developed based on research to identify the policies that that programs need to have minimally in place in order to reach the level of quality that can impact child outcomes. So we look every year to see whether or not states are meeting these 10 quality standards benchmarks and track that over time. So we've been doing the yearbook survey since 2002. So it's the only state-by-state report on state-funded preschool programs. And we have, we're getting close to about 2 decades worth of data on programs over time. So I'll give you a look of what our minimum standards benchmarks look like. These are our 10 benchmarks, and I'll do a quick walkthrough of each of them to give some understanding of what they are, what it means to meet them, and the extent to which state programs are actually able to meet them. And you'll notice that I have a few that have an asterisk next to them and that are bolded. Those are ones that to kind of keep a particular ear out for as we're talking about teacher quality of programs. These are the benchmarks that are that really particularly speak to that issue. So I'll try to point that out as I go along. Our first benchmark is about early learning and development standards. So we look to see whether or not states have a policy in place that establishes an ELDS, but also that supports the ELDS. So we want to see that state standards are comprehensive. So they are meeting all domains of children's development at ages 3 and 4 years old, but also that they're aligned. So we know there's standards in most places for children who are infants and toddlers, and then of course also for kindergartners through 12th graders. So we want to see alignment across those standards. We also want to see support for those standards. So the state agencies that are overseeing our state-funded preschool programs should be providing support for the dissemination of the standards, professional development on those standards, and ensuring that the programs understand and are using the standards in their programs. And finally, we want to make sure that our early learning and development standards are culturally sensitive. So we know we have an incredibly diverse population of learners in our state pre-K programs and want to make sure that standards are sensitive to all the cultural needs of children and families who are attending those programs. So thankfully, this is one of the standards that the most programs are able to meet. 97% of our state preschool programs are able to meet this early learning and development standards benchmark. Our next benchmark is on curriculum supports. So we know how important it is for programs to have a strong curriculum in place. And what we look for is policies for the state agency overseeing preschool, the state-funded preschool program, to assist programs in the selection of a curriculum and then support in both getting professional development on that curriculum, and then providing additional professional development and supports for teachers who are implementing that curriculum over time. And about 90% of our state programs are able to meet that benchmark. So I'll start to move into some of the more teacher-specific related benchmarks. Teacher degree, I think we just heard in the video how important it is for teachers to have a specific education and credentials related to early childhood in order to increase the quality of programs. So we look to see whether or not state programs have a policy in place that requires the lead teacher in each preschool program classroom to have at least a bachelor's degree. And surprisingly, only 60% of our programs have that policy in place. The remainder require either an associate's degree or a high school diploma for teachers, for the lead teachers in state pre-K programs. But we also know that it's not enough just to have a bachelor's degree. So we look to see whether or not states require specialized training in preschool education and training specific to preschool education. So it's not just our teachers have training in kindergarten. We want to make sure that they actually have training in the age levels in which they'll be teaching. So 3- and 4-year-old age children. What's interesting is you'll notice that a larger percentage of state programs are able to meet that benchmark than the bachelor's degree benchmark. And that's because we have states that require, for example, their teachers to have a child development associate or a CDA, which is specific training in early childhood education. So they might require the CDA, but not the BA, and thus meet the specialized training benchmark. Assistant teacher degrees is actually one of the benchmarks that states struggle with the most. We look to see whether or not states require at least that CDA credential for teachers or for assistant teachers in state pre-K programs, and less than a third of our programs actually meet that. Most commonly, states require a high school diploma or actually are silent on the assistant teacher degree requirement in their state programs. But we know that it's important not just to look at what teachers are coming to the door with, right? Not just the education and the credentials that they get before they become teachers, but also the professional development that they receive, the support that they receive once they are teachers to continue to help them hone their craft. So we have a professional development benchmark that looks to see whether or not both teachers and teacher assistants are provided with at least 15 hours of professional development every year, in addition to having individualized professional development plans and coaching. And you'll see that, unfortunately, this is the benchmark that the fewest number of state programs are able to meet. Less than a quarter of them receive this benchmark. And it's for a few different reasons. The most prevalent reason is because states provide these supports to teachers, but not to teacher assistants. And we know it's really important to provide this kind of training and support to all of the teaching staff in a program, not just the lead teachers. The other issue we see is that states provide the professional development, but not necessarily the individualized professional development plans that are specific to the individual teacher and teacher assistant, or the coaching that then is used in conjunction with that professional development plan. Our next few benchmarks I'll talk about together because they're really interrelated. We look to see whether or not programs have a policy in place that limits class size to no more than 20 children in the class, and staff-child ratio to no more than 10 children for every adult. And you can see that most of our state pre-K programs are meeting this benchmark. We have a few that have different regulations for 3-year-olds versus 4-year-olds, or maybe are even silent on class sizes, which as you can imagine, any teacher who has more than 20 preschoolers in a classroom, that's a pretty overwhelming endeavor for anyone. Our 9th benchmark is on screening and referral. So we look to see whether or not programs are required to assess children's vision and hearing and other health, and not just whether that screening is required, but whether referrals are required when children are screened and there may be a potential issue. You'll notice that about 2/3 of our programs meet this benchmark. What typically happens is that programs require the screening, but not the follow-up referral after that screening. And our last benchmark is one of our newer benchmarks. It's our benchmark that looks to see whether or not states have systems in place for continuous quality improvement. And what we want to see is programs requiring a regular system of structured classroom observations to look at the program quality and then take data from those structured observations and using that data at both the local program level and also at the state level to see how programs are improving over time or not improving over time, using that data to feed back into the system and maybe impact professional development that's being offered to teachers to make sure that programs continue to improve over time. and just about 2/3 of our programs meet those benchmarks. So that's a very quick overview of NIEER's 10 benchmarks that we track every year, in addition to quite a number of other policy areas and aspects like access and resources for state-funded preschool programs. But the other aspect that I wanted to share with you today is something else that we do in our yearbook every year, which we have a supplemental section to our survey every year on a topic of particular interest at the time. And in 2018, our special report was questions related to supporting teachers in state-funded preschool. And we found, I think our findings you'll find potentially disappointing, but maybe not surprising in terms of how poorly, really, we are supporting our teachers in our state-funded preschool programs. So I'll take you through some of the findings that we had from that report. When we look in general about different kinds of support for the state-funded preschool workforce, we see generally weak support. So when we look outside of things like salaries and benefits, and we look at things that help teachers to benefit themselves over time, things like scholarships, loan forgiveness, and then those critical mentoring and coaching aspects that I talked about before, we see that in almost every case, just if 50% of state-funded preschool teachers are being provided these resources, they're lucky. So fewer than 50% are provided with any kind of scholarship that would help them, for example, move from a high school diploma to an associate's degree or a CDA, and then from there on to a bachelor's degree. And without that, we know how poor compensation is for teachers in these programs, and without those scholarships, without that loan forgiveness, makes it incredibly difficult for teachers to achieve higher education standards. And this is true for teachers in our state-funded preschool programs who serve in both public settings and in private provider settings. And then I think this is one of the crux of the conversation today, that true salary parity is incredibly rare. And this is true not just within our childcare system, but also within our state-funded preschool system. So what we looked at is how many states require all of their teachers, regardless of setting, whether they're in a private childcare setting or a public childcare setting, whether they require teachers in the state-funded preschool system to have at least a bachelor's degree. And 28 states have that requirement. Of those 28, 25 then require, in addition to the bachelor's degree, a certification. But of those 25, only four states require those teachers to be paid comparably to their K-12 teacher peers who have similar qualifications. And that's across both public preschool settings and private preschool settings. So it's no wonder that we have our early childhood teachers struggling when they have teachers who are teaching in school buildings right next door to them who are making significantly more money than they are. And we see
Karin?
that. Yeah.
Karin, just one question. We want to be responsive to people in the chat, and we did get a good question. Someone was asking if you could just clarify how you all are defining pre-K throughout your work, right? Because there's a lot of things that happen before kindergarten, and just wondering where you all are focusing.
Absolutely. So NIEER has a very specific definition of pre-K, and so it's we look at state-funded programs that serve 3- and 4-year-old children in programs that we distinguish from subsidized childcare programs. So they need to be programs that are not based on any kind of an education or work requirement for parents, but that are provided to families through other. Our programs definitely have eligibility requirements, but those eligibility requirements can't be tied to parents' work or education status. So these are generally either Human Services or Department of Education administered programs throughout the country. They're primarily funded with state funds. There's a smattering of federal funding that gets added in, and a little bit of local funding in states that are able to report it. So does that help clarify?
I think so. We had a couple more questions coming in. Sure. Senator Wilson was wondering if you could name those 4 states that have the salary parity.
Off the top of my head, I know New Jersey.
I'll put you on the spot, sorry.
I know New Jersey is one of them. I'd have to look up the other 4, which I can probably do while my colleagues are presenting, but I know New Jersey is one and I'm forgetting the other 4. If you had asked me last year, I would have been able to rattle them off, but I don't remember them off the top of my head. But I'll definitely, Patrick, I can chat them back to you.
Okay. Looks like the chat is blowing up now, so I'll just hit these real quick while we have you kind of paused.
Sure.
We have a question. Can you share whether the states with true salary parity are for private market providers as well, or just for the publicly provided providers, and if they apply to infant and toddler teachers or just pre-K teachers?
So the first part of the question is, yes, we only counted the 4 who provide parity to teachers who are working in both private settings and public settings. But remember that these are teachers who are in a specific part of the early care and education workforce. So these are teachers who are part of state-funded preschool programs. And I'm sure, and I don't want to put Caitlin on the spot, but I'm sure she'll probably speak a bit more broadly about the early care and education field, probably inclusive of state pre-K, but also more broadly than that. So this is a subset of our early care and education workforce that does not include infants and toddlers. These are our 3 and 4 teachers of 3 and 4-year-olds.
Great. And it looks like the last one for now from our friend Lisa from Oregon is, does NIEER's analysis include early childhood special education programs?
So we, to the extent that those programs are integrated into the state preschool program, yes. So we ask a lot of questions about whether or not, so we ascertain for each state whether or not special children with disabilities are included in the state-funded preschool program. For some states they are, and for some states they're not.
Well, so thank you. Yeah, we appreciate that. We're just trying to be responsive to the chat, so people's burning questions get answered. So back to your previously scheduled material. Thanks, Karin.
No problem, and please interrupt as I go. I think this slide is actually one of the most jarring of the work that we did on salary parity. So what we're looking at here is of the states that are able to provide us with information on average teacher salaries. And these are teachers, these are states that require a bachelor's degree for all of their teachers, regardless of what setting they're in. We see that state-funded preschool teachers in public school settings are paid almost $7,500 less per year than their K-3 peers. So this is literally what we're talking about here, is a preschool teacher in one classroom who's down the hall from a kindergarten teacher in the same building is on average making $7,500 less than that kindergarten through 3rd grade teacher, even though they have the same education requirements to be in those positions. But what's worse is that when we look at teachers within the state pre-K program again, but who happen to be teaching down the block in a private provider setting, are making almost $18,000 less than their K-3 peers. So it really is staggering when you look at this, and you start to understand why these teachers are having to take jobs driving Ubers in the afternoon, because they're just making so much less than they should be, based on what their colleagues are making and based on the educational requirements that are being imposed on them in order to have their job in the first place. And just to tease that out a little bit further, because we know that compensation is about more than just salaries. When we look at things like retirement and healthcare, we look at equal paid planning time. We can see right here, not only are teachers in public school settings, preschool teachers in public school settings, not being provided with equal retirement and healthcare to their K-3 peers, or equal paid planning time with their K-3 peers, but their colleagues in private provider settings are very, very infrequently being provided with those supports. So only 3 of our state pre-K programs out of over 60 are requiring equal retirement and healthcare for teachers who happen to be teaching in private settings. And just about 10 are requiring equal paid planning time with K-3 teachers, which just means that teachers in private settings are having to do a whole lot of work outside their regular school day or work day in order to prepare in ways that their colleagues are not. So some work that we did this year with NIEER is looking at what would it take if we wanted to really invest in quality and invest in our teachers. We did a cost analysis of what it would take for each of the 50 states and DC to meet all 10 of NIEER's quality standards benchmarks, provide a full day program, and also provide salary parity for teachers. So what you see here, and I don't think, again, this headline is particularly surprising, that quality is expensive. Although as Jenny was telling us in her presentation, we get what we pay for and we get great returns on what we invest in early childhood education. So even though quality is expensive, most of our states aren't spending enough to achieve high quality. So the per child amounts that you see in this map are what NIEER is estimating each state needs to spend per child in order to meet all 10 of our policy quality benchmarks, provide a full day program to all children, and also provide salary parity for teachers and teacher assistants in programs. The shading that you're seeing is indicating how far off states are from that goal. So the dark red states are the states that are at least $5,000 or more away from that goal. And as you can see, the vast majority of this map is dark red. The states that are in lighter colors, in particular the white color, are at least within striking distance. So we see New Jersey and DC, which is this tiny little dot here, West Virginia, North Carolina, Alabama, Oklahoma, are all, again, within a reasonable range of meeting where we think they should be in terms of per child spending. But in most of the country, we have a long way to go. And this includes our 6 states that don't currently have a state-funded preschool program. So, the total price tag, it's not for the faint of heart. It's going to take a massive investment. But when we look at this all together, what it would look like across the nation, the true cost of universal high quality pre-K is about $91 billion annual. And that would be to serve all 3- and 4-year-olds in a high quality full day program while providing salary parity to teachers. So if we break this down a little bit, we're currently spending about $10.4 billion across the nation in our state-funded preschool programs, and we're spending just under $7 billion right now on 3- and 4-year-olds in Head Start. So that's taking early Head Start out of that figure. Now, if we wanted to take all of our current state-funded preschool slots and our current 3- and 4-year-old Head Start slots and move all of them up to full day, move all of them up to the highest quality standards, and provide salary parity, we would need another $12 billion on top of what we're already spending in order to achieve that. Now, if once we establish that, we then want to expand that program out to at least all low-income 3- and 4-year-olds, we need another $31 billion per year to do that, and then another $32 billion on top of that to reach a truly universal program that would serve all 3- and 4-year-old children. So again, like I said, not a price tag for the faint of heart, but certainly an investment that we know has incredibly strong returns over time. And what we're hoping to see, I think the conversations that we're seeing at the federal level about universal preschool, I think what we'd love to see is some sort of partnership between the federal government and states to share the burden of this investment, particularly because we've seen some success in those partnerships in the past. And then just in light of the conversations that you all are having today, I wanted to pull out the states that are on the call today and just show you in a little bit larger font some of the numbers that we were looking at before. So the first column is showing the 2020 per child spending for state-funded preschool only. So this is as reported to NIEER by the administrators of your state-funded preschool programs, and where your current per child spending is. The third column is looking at NIEER's estimate to meet all 10 NIEER benchmarks, to provide a full day, and to provide salary parity. And then just for a little bit of scale, I also provided per child amounts to meet the 10 benchmarks and full day, but without salary parities, just so you can see the impact on the per child rates that it has when you add that salary parity into the conversation.